everyone, welcome back to Staying Connected. Before I let you listen to this episode, I just wanted to describe where you're going to find certain parts of the episode. So this is a special episode with my mom that we recorded together, and the beginning of the episode really talks more about the medical mystery when I was growing up, when I was little through teenage years, and some about in college. And then the second half of the episode is very much more how did we deal with this emotional aspect of diagnosis and how have we coped with it as a mother and daughter. So I hope you enjoy this special episode, and now I will let you listen to it. Hey everyone, welcome back to Staying Connected. This is Katie, your host, and today I have a special guest with me, my mother, and she is going to tell us about her experience with me as a child, not knowing that I had Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. And I think it's going to be good for me too, because there are bits and pieces of my childhood that still don't make sense to me because I only remember certain pieces. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Katie, for having me. My name is Joy, and I've been your mom now your entire life.
It's so nice to meet you.
Yes.
So anybody who has met my mom at a conference or anything knows that she is an absolute pleasure to be around. One could say a joy.
Oh, thank you.
So I have, everybody on this show, I think, who listens to this show knows that I have vEDS, or Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. But you do not have vEDS, and nobody else in the family that we know of has vEDS. So what was it like? I want to take you back to the beginning. I was your first child.
Right.
So what was the pregnancy like?
So at the time, you were planned, and I was so excited. I think everything felt pretty normal. Up until my water broke early. Mm-hmm. In retrospect, now I look back, and the one thing I craved and I ate all the time was oranges, which is odd. I don't think most pregnant women want to have oranges, but I think I ate like two. I feel like I ate 2 or 3 oranges a day. Wow. Which in retrospect now I kind of get it, but so pregnancy was normal, and then when you were like, I was about 35 and a half weeks pregnant. I was painting your nursery, mm-hmm. climbing up on the ladder, painting the walls, and finished that up. And then the next morning I woke up and I thought I had peed in my pants basically, but my water had broke. And so I went to the hospital, and I did not deliver you for like 3 more days. So you were about, right at 36 weeks mm-hmm. when I delivered you. And then the only thing there that was unusual is you had jaundice.
Oh,
you had jaundice. So, they put you under the lights, and they kept you with me and nursed you. And so then that was it. That was it. And I always thought that I had you early because I painted your nursery for 28 years. That was my belief, that I had made that mistake. Should not have climbed the ladder, should not have, used any paint. But now
we know with vEDS, it seems like everybody is born a little early, or a lot of people are born a little early. One of my first memories as a child is trying to open my eye underneath this bandage that was over it in like pre-K or something. I think that's one of my earliest memories because I had eye surgery.
Right. Well, and you had to wear a prism for a while too, to try to build up the strength. So I think early on we figured out that you were complicated because a lot of things kept happening, and nothing that was so unusual outside of like a normal, like you had a lot of ear infections, so you had to have ear tubes. Mm-hmm. But your eyes at like 2 years old, you had, really thick glasses, and your eyes were not going in the right direction. And so you've had 3 surgeries to correct the muscles in your eyes over your childhood. You had 3. Okay. And the first one was like at 2 years old, but you had to wear a prism to try to build up. So like over your glasses was this film also. Yes. And it was like this ridge thing. And it was meant so that you could try to build up the muscles in your eyes. So you probably remember that.
Okay.
Too.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. So tell me more about the ear infections. Because I remember, even now, only a couple months ago, I ruptured 2 eardrums.
Right, and now I want you to go get ear tubes. But you're now an adult, and I can't tell you what to do. That's an adjustment for me. But you had them twice when you were young as a toddler, and you were put under anesthesia. Okay. And they didn't take out your tonsils and adenoids at that time. They just kept putting in the ear tubes, and then I want to say you're about 7 or 8 years old, and I took you to you had another infection, your eardrum had perforated. I'm like, please, let's do something. That I don't want you to suffer. And they recommended that you do another, ear tube. And I said, well, I don't want her to be under anesthesia anymore. Then she has to be. Can't we just, why do we have to take her through that whole process of the anesthesia? Why can't you? And the doctor's like, well, does she stay still? I'm like, she's an exceptional patient. So he had you lay down in the office, and he gave you a drop in your ear, which hurt you a lot, but then it numbed you. And then he slipped the ear tube in, and then we were out the door, and it was over. It was great. So
how rapidly would the ear infections develop? Were those fast?
Oh, all the time. You had them recurring all the time. And for 2 years, you were on prophylactic antibiotics, because the moment you'd go off antibiotics, you would get another ear infection.
And I remember, for anybody listening, whenever my eardrums perforated, I just remember screaming in pain until the moment that it would actually perforate, and then it was just a wave of relief because it was no longer pressure.
I'll never forget the first time that happened. You were sitting in my room, and you were rocking back and forth in a lot of pain, and all of a sudden you looked up and you go, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. And I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. And then I looked, and blood was coming out of your ears, and it just blew my mind. I don't even know what to say. I didn't even really understand what that was at the time. Until I took you to the doctor, and I immediately called.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's still the same reaction I have when they perforate now. It's that screaming, I'm rocking back and forth, and so much pain, and then my ears start bleeding. I'm it's just oh, I feel so much better.
Right. Yeah.
So, what else was odd?
Your gastro problems. You had, I would say, 6, 7, 8 years old, you started, just vomiting. And I think you had, you had acid reflux. So it caused you a lot of heartburn and pain, which caused the nausea, which caused the vomiting. So I took you to the gastroenterologist, the pediatric gastroenterologist, and she did the test, the barium swallow test, to see how everything went. Walked away with a lot of recommendations lift your bed up, an inch or 2 on one side, eat first thing when you get up in the morning. But, it felt like all through this period, we would find something and we would knock it out like a whack-a-ball. Mm-hmm. That's what I felt like I was playing. Because the other thing that happened when you were 3-ish year old is that you were not your normal height or weight. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of tests there, are you eating enough, etc. And then they did testing, and you were deficient in your growth hormone. Mm-hmm. So you went on growth hormone, which the first year that you were on growth hormone, I think you grew 5 inches, and I'm not kidding. It was significant. You were never, the tallest person in the class, but you were at least in the 10th percentile. You were at least on the chart, which was fabulous, because you were not even near. And your brother was you know, when you got to a certain age, like they all thought you were twins, even though you were older than him. So
Yeah, there's some pretty cute pictures of us that were pretty similar.
You guys were famous. You're so cute.
Famous.
Yeah.
So there's the growth hormone thing, and then all the stomach problems. Did the barium test ever show anything like concrete?
Nope.
No. Mm-hmm. So they just like basically we don't really know, but these things might help.
Correct.
Okay.
From what I remember, because it wasn't anything I could fix in a surgery or anything like that. It was just she just has heartburn, and it could be that you had like a slow swallowing situation, where like the acid would want to come back up, which is why they wanted you to be not sleeping, laying down. Mm-hmm. But nothing earth shattering.
Okay. See, I always thought that at that time I was diagnosed with like gastrointestinal reflux disease or whatever
GERD.
it is. Yeah, GERD. And I thought that was like just the answer. But now that I'm like an adult and I still have some of these problems, I'm like, well, maybe that was never an answer. And that's just another symptom of the bigger thing that's going on in there. And it's been very much like so many mysteries I felt like when I was growing up that didn't have answers. So like, how did that make you feel as a parent when I was younger?
I was really frustrated. But at that time, I had a lot of faith in the doctors that I took you to. And I took you to many, many doctors, like one specialist after another. Because again, okay, you have this situation, I'm going to take you to the specialist. You have this situation, I'm going to take you to the specialist. It wasn't like someone just said, well, wait, you've got all of these problems. Let me put them all together and see if something fits. Yeah. Because I remember when we took it in, we kept taking to the pediatric endocrinologist.
For the growth hormone?
For every 3 months or so, we'd get your blood tested and you make it, okay? So, and I remember showing the doctor your hands and saying, this is unusual, and, oh, she's just dainty,
And that was because my hands looked like bony or older.
Right. You had very narrow fingers, and you had started to become self-conscious of them, and that's why I mentioned it to the doctor too. Yeah. But yeah, I just I look back now, of course, hindsight is always 20/20, and it should have been something very a very different outcome than what we experienced.
And so when I was a kid, I remember around that time, I remember my bone age it felt to me like my hands were scanned all the time, but that's just probably because those are the only pieces that I remember of the bigger picture.
I think you only had a bone age 1 or 2 times, and that was at the end of your growth hormone. It wasn't like they did a bone age all the time.
Okay. So the hands, though, I definitely remember when I was a kid being self-conscious about, because I think sometime in early elementary school, I had a teacher that I felt like didn't like me, and I remember telling one of my friends that I thought it was because of the way my hands looked. And I thought that the teacher didn't like me because of the way that my hands looked, and they looked just much older than a normal kid's hand. None of my friends' hands looked like my hands. And you can't hide your hands in Florida either. There's no reason to wear gloves.
No, we could have moved to Alaska.
I could have been very happy with gloves all the time. No one would never see my hands. But I also remember something in elementary school, and I don't remember if this is a solid memory or not. There's so many little things when you're young that you're like, what was the actual story here? So I remember getting in trouble in kindergarten for hitting the bell on the teacher's desk, because one of the kids that was a troublemaker was like, oh yeah, just hit the bell, she won't mind, or something like that. And I was new to the class in this memory. Mm-hmm. And I did, and she was mad at me, and she just she probably lightly grabbed my wrist or something to bring me somewhere else. But I remember having bruises from that. Do you remember that?
No. But I remember bruising a lot. You would be bruised a lot, but I don't remember that particular memory. Okay. The bruising thing, I take you to the doctors and you have bruises, and you're like, oh, every kid bruises. I feel like my faith in doctors has been somewhat shattered.
Yeah.
Because every little thing that we now know is related to vEDS was dismissed as, and plus I'm trying to think of how long ago that was. That we didn't have a situation where I could just go Google something.
Right.
Like we can now.
The internet wasn't there yet.
Right.
In the capacity that it is
Correct.
now.
Right.
So.
Or even 10 years ago. I mean, I think you started Googling.
Oh, yeah.
A lot.
Because when I would go to a doctor and they would tell me, oh, yeah, you have scleroderma, you got to go get tested. But we're sure this is scleroderma. Never seen a more clear case of scleroderma. Like, I'm going to bring my medical student in here so I could show him what scleroderma looks like. And it's a cardiologist. So I'm like, well, this is scleroderma. And I had full faith in the medical system, too. So I'd be like, okay, this is what this is. And I would go and I had Google. So I would research what scleroderma was. And I was like a science student in school. So I knew how to do research in a way that I was like finding good websites and not bad ones. But I had such faith in them that I was like, well, I mean, they must be right. Somebody finally figured it out, because there were so many little things in my life that didn't make sense, that whenever a doctor would very clearly tell me, like, this is what you have, you got to go get tested to confirm it, but this is it. I would take it at full faith. Somebody finally figured it out, and then it wouldn't be that. And so there were a lot of those moments. So even with the elastosis perforans serpiginosa, which was that, like,
I thought you had ringworm.
Oh, yeah. And like a year and a half later, I still have ringworm and it's not gone. And I had tried like everything on my own willpower to try to get it to go away. So I go to this dermatologist and like they do a biopsy, and like while they're waiting for the biopsy results, I'm like going through old pictures, and I find this picture 7 years ago of me playing with an armadillo, and I'm like, armadillos carry leprosy.
Yeah.
So I go to the rheumatologist, of course, where I had been under evaluation for scleroderma, because that dermatologist thought I might have scleroderma or something systemic. And I say, well, is there any chance it could be leprosy? Because I found this picture of me with an armadillo. The latency period's like 5 to 15 years or something like that. It's right in the right range. It's a weird skin thing. He's like, oh my God, yeah, we should test you for leprosy. So I'm like, oh, I figured it out. It's leprosy, and then it wasn't.
Just a lot of false starts.
Yeah, it was. It was a lot of false starts.
Yes.
And none of it was related to the actual thing. It was all
it's
like autoimmune.
It's like you're trying to figure out the one thing.
Right. I'm like, oh, I'm going to figure out this thing on my arm and it's going to explain everything, but that's not really the thing. Or like if we had figured out the stomach thing, it would have been a small piece of a bigger thing.
Right.
Or that, like, there's so many of those there. So one of the things that I've like recently come to terms with is the amount of scarring on my body compared to somebody else. So I know a lot of those happened when I was a kid. What was that like?
Okay. Well, when you were younger, it was great because you listened more because, you'd hurt yourself. I mean, the very first thing that happened, you were just a little over a year old. Mm-hmm. You had fallen at your great-grandmother's house, and, you hit your head. We immediately took you to the emergency room, and then the plastic surgeon was able to, like, stitch you up because it was a pretty deep gash on your forehead. But there were a lot of those things in your childhood. But the older you got, I think you just got tired of things happening, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember one time you kind of like walked by a couch and you nicked the edge of the couch and your knee was bleeding. I knew you needed stitches. And I'm like, let's take you. No, I don't want to go get stitches. And this was like an hour long. I want to say you were at this point like...
I was 9.
Yeah, but you were you were like a 13-year-old 9. You were not like you were a force even back then. You were a very strong person. And I'm like, oh, okay. So we just kind of like bandaged it up, and I think you have a scar, but
I have a nice
I think
scar.
you feel... I recently went to a concert, and I love this quote. The quote was, "A scar isn't where you were injured, it's where you healed." And I'm like,
I love that.
I love that. I love that.
I never heard that.
Yeah.
I've always thought of scars as just like signs of being a badass. Like I don't know
yeah, right.
I was like very proud of my
You were,
scars.
and this is when you were 9. This is exactly the way you were. Like no, oh my god, I have
scars
on
are
my
cool.
leg. Yeah, but yeah. So
yeah,
I'm looking at it in a different lens now.
So what lens do you look at it in now?
Now, I look at it where you healed, because I think it's, for someone to have a connective tissue disorder and has many times that you have healed, it's pretty remarkable. So I like that.
That's sweet. So let's fast forward then. I text you one day and I tell you I think I figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you I think it's vascular EDS. So that time is a blur for me. So,
and I'm looking at this text and I'm like, what is this? And I try to put it in the realm of, first of all, of course I went and Googled it later.
Yeah.
Because I was at work,
Yeah.
But I didn't want you to have it.
Right.
So any mother that doesn't want their kid to have that is just going to say that you don't have that. But there were a lot of times that between you and the doctors, you're like, okay, we think that we know what this is now. And then the test would come back and it would be negative.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of those that I had in the back of my mind. So when I saw the next item, the vEDS, I was like, oh, I'm an average person. I mean, everything in my life is average. Average height, average weight, average intelligence, everything is average about me. That I'm like, how can I have a child that has something so rare? I just couldn't even imagine it. And then, of course, it came back positive, and then I was in complete denial. Mm-hmm. And I was completely stunned. Yeah.
And I was 28 at the time that the test result came back. And I remember you being upset that you didn't have it.
Right. Well, because that was as soon as I found out that you had it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go get tested. Oh. So I did. And I really wanted to, so that you weren't by yourself.
Yeah.
Or we had a logical reason why this is happening.
Yeah.
And then when I came back negative, I was like sad because I felt like you were alone and I didn't want you to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like sitting at my doctor's office just like crying, like, which I don't tell you all that stuff.
Oh, I knew it was happening.
Yeah.
I knew it had to be happening, but there was nothing I could do. There's just nothing. I don't think there's anything that can make a parent feel better immediately about that, right?
Well, first of all, it's not your job to make me feel better.
No.
You know what I'm saying? So, but for me, it was like I had my moments very separately from you because I did not, going through that whole process. Mm-hmm. It was something I was, here my kid is 20 years old. I took her to all these doctors when she was growing up and dealing with every complication that came about. And then finding out, initially I was like, I missed it. Like that. I felt like I had missed it. So it was just a range of emotions that I went through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you were the inspiration for me pushing that hard to finally figure it out. Do you know that?
No, I did not know that.
So there was a conversation because for about a year prior to this point, I was having, I had that onset of spontaneous neck pain, which was completely awful. And then it recurred 3 or 4 times. And we didn't know what it was. And I was in a pain management clinic and they were going to be making sure I didn't have a compression of an artery or something. But there was a point when it happened and I called you and I had come back, I think, from the orthopedic rapid care clinic because it had happened again and I was like, there has to be an explanation. And I go and they're like, we've already scanned you, there's nothing we can do for you, there's nothing wrong in there. And I called you and I was crying and I was like, nobody believes me that there's something wrong. The feeling was maybe it's me. Maybe I'm a hypochondriac. Maybe there's nothing wrong. Maybe it's all in my head. And you said, Katie, if you think something's wrong, Don't give up. Find the answer, and you just have to keep being your own advocate. And I was at the point where, like, I had been my own advocate, I think, for so long that I didn't want to anymore. I was like, well, maybe there's nothing wrong.
It's exhausting.
It's so exhausting, especially when there's no answers, too. And when you said that to me, I was like, okay, like, I'm not going to give up. And it wasn't that long after that I figured it out. And then spent several months trying to get somebody to test me. But, I mean, that was ultimately the inspiration for me figuring it out. Thank you.
I think back to how persistent you were. I mean, you were always such a strong-willed person, like from birth. And I just think if you had not been as strong-willed as you were and persistent and your own advocate, fiercely so, we could not be doing this podcast today. You know, like we could still be, you know, you could still be going through each of those things. And I admire that so much about you. So for you to say thank you to me, I don't feel like that's, I mean, I appreciate that, but you did it. You know, you alone did it. And it's a remarkable story. I always tell people, like, you know, when at my friends or something, I said, it's like a podcast story. It's like listening to someone go through a whole thing about how they self-discovered. And she's just amazing. So
thank you. So you found out, and we went through, I remember going through this denial phase, and then it was like separate grieving.
Correct.
And then you started coming around.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get through that grief?
Well, I like went off Facebook for a whole year. It was just a whole. I'm the type of person, I think, when I go through something like, well, that was the biggest thing I've ever gone through in my life, but like I just go inward, and I just knew I just had to deal with it. I look back, I wish I would have not done that, but you know, hindsight's 20/20. I just had to, first thing I had to do was like get out of the denial mode. Like, okay, I cannot believe all those years and this is what it was. And, you know, so I got out of the denial. And then it was, okay, well, it's my fault. You know, had I done this or this or this or this, we could have found out sooner. Or, you know, and then also I was going through all, you know, and then, so anyway, fast forward to, all right, so I think about a year later is when I started to really come out of it. And there were a lot of people in the vEDS community that inspired me. Because well, when it started to sink in was when I called the geneticist, and, you know, I asked some very candid, you know, just ask a lot of questions, cried on the phone. And then I think I went to my first vEDS community event.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's when I started to come out of it.
I remember being very proud of you for wanting to come and then coming.
Well, there were so many other mothers there.
Yeah.
And some mothers that had lost their children. And I thought, I want to be like that. I don't want to be the person sitting in the corner, like wondering what just happened.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be the mother that is supportive, you know, because you can wallow in it or you can do something about it. And I just decided I wanted to do something about it. So I forgave myself basically for how I had responded, and you know, wish that I had done things differently, and just decided I was going to do something different. The way, I don't know, I feel like when you ask someone for forgiveness, the best way to do it is just change the way that you're behaving. So I just started changing how I was behaving, you know, like just because I really wanted to do it inside. I just had to get myself motivated to do it.
Yeah. And for the record, I never thought that you needed forgiving. That was just me.
Oh.
I just knew that, like, you were going through the grieving process, and I know that, like, from knowing you for 28 years at that point, like, that's how you grieve.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just kind of like, I'm just going to let her grieve. And I would try to do things to not make it worse. But it was hard because it was like, you're my best friend, and so I'm going to call you. And when I'm upset, I'm calling you, and I know it's not helping your situation.
Right.
either.
Well, and you would call me, and then I would just do the best I could, and then I would hang up, and then I would just have a breakdown and cry, and yeah. It was a little cyclical. It was.
It was hard.
It really it was hard for both of us. But I am the mom. That, like, you should not think about comforting me at all. That is not in any way acceptable to me. It is a parent's responsibility to always comfort their child. So I, thank you for being as patient as you were as I was going through that. Because but the other thing that came out of it was you gravitated toward people in the community, mm-hmm. and you built a family. And then I was encircled in that family, and it was healing.
Yeah. So, as a parent of an adult child with vEDS, what would be something if someone joined the group today and their child was just diagnosed with that? Is there anything that you would tell them from your experience?
I would encourage them to get involved sooner rather than later, mm-hmm. because it will help you heal and deal with the situation so much easier than when I was trying to deal with it all by myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes you it's like ripping off the Band-Aid. Just get in it, and you're going to feel so much better than just slowly dealing with it all by yourself. Because there's so many wonderful people that will support you.
Yeah, and there's so much knowledge out there that I think some of these people have that their regular physicians don't have, too, just from being in it all the time in the group. Mm-hmm. Like, you might ask a question to your primary care doctor, like, oh, that's not a thing, but then you go to the Facebook group and somebody hands you this research paper that very clearly shows it's a thing.
Right. I mean, when I go to my doctors and I say, my daughter has this, or something, they're like, what is it?
Yeah.
And it's a constant, I feel like I'm more educated in there. And now, I'm offering, okay, so now, if you need someone to come speak to your physician group, I'm offering up services, so
yeah,
trying to get the word out.
Yeah, that's like the space that I live in too.
Right. Another thing that would be helpful for mm-hmm. other parents is when you invited me to go see your doctors with you. Mm-hmm. That was a big event for me. Mm-hmm. To be able to be in the room, to ask them questions, just to see your exam, they brought in students to show, and okay, this is a person who has vEDS. That was helpful because it made it more real, and while it's rare, it made it I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't, I know it's rare, but it brought it home, I guess.
Yeah. Well, here's people who work with it all the time.
Correct. It made it feel more common.
Right.
Because they specialized in it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was comforting because you have people also out there, doctors that are specializing it and spending their own many, many hours, their own personal time.
Yeah. And those doctors were Shireen and Peter.
Right.
But there's other specialists out there too.
Yeah, Shane.
And Shane Morris,
mm-hmm.
Hal Dietz. Mm-hmm. And then you've got Melissa Russo doing the pregnancy stuff, Diane Melowitz studying it. There's a few people just kind of like scattered, but I feel like it's growing.
But it's comforting.
It is comforting.
Because at the time, okay, so this is where the mother part's going to come out. You get the diagnosis, and immediately I'm like, okay, we're going to solve this. Not solve the diagnosis, but I don't want you to live by yourself. I don't, I mean, like.
Oh yeah, and I was like, no.
We talked about getting you a service animal.
Mm-hmm.
We got the echo so that you could call. Like all these things started happening, and I as an adult, a parent of an adult, I don't have a say. I can only, give advice. Sometimes solicited, sometimes unsolicited, unfortunately. But I guess sitting there in a room with doctors that specialize in this, it's validating that, number one, the test was right, and number two, my kid is amazing because she is a personal advocate for herself, and these doctors really are going to take good care of her.
Mm-hmm.
And so for parents out there, I encourage you to get more involved for that reason, because that was like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one looking after my kid. I think that's what it felt.
Oh yeah,
that's what it was like.
I can see that.
And then I go to the vets meetings. And I was like, oh, there's other people. They also care about my kid, and they care about everyone's kids, and I care about all their kids.
Yeah,
and it's like this little community, and that part was I wasn't alone. That made me feel not alone.
Yeah, I mean, it really has been awesome to me to see you, like, pick up the torch.
Well, I feel like it's a win-win.
Yeah.
I'm making myself feel better. I feel like I'm supporting you, and I'm supporting the community.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I'm nothing in comparison to some of the other mothers out there that I admire so much. I want to be like them when I grow up. So I have a long way to go, but there's been people that have carried the torch, and it's my turn, and I want to. So.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Oh, wait, I have one more thing.
Uh-huh.
I think you're amazing in how I tell people at work this all the time. You've gotten a big bowl of lemons, and you're making the best lemonade because you are spending your life raising awareness, doing a podcast, you have a blog. I mean, the rest of your life will be about this, and you're on a mission, and it's I've heard so many people have come up to me very, on the side, oh, Katie's amazing, and I'm super, super proud. You have no idea. So
thank you. I certainly did not expect that this is where my life was going to go.
No. I thought for sure you were going to be an entomologist.
Oh yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, I really wanted to study bugs, but then I found out that you have to kill them to do that, and I was like, no. So I'll just take pictures of them all the time. And I'll be a scientist, but I'll also be a musician. And it was just kind of like this mess of, like, maybe I'll be a triple major and these three things. And that was like, what am I doing? I should just get out of school. But now, like, when I was diagnosed with this, like, this is not where I expected my life to go. And I am really glad it did. Like, in some ways, it gave my life so much more purpose.
Right.
I'm like, this is very clearly what I need to be doing with my life. And I don't think I would have had that same kind of passion with such certainty. Like, hopefully, like, my hope is, like, one day, even after I'm gone, that if somebody is diagnosed, even as a kid, they'll have all of these resources out there for them,
mm-hmm.
and they won't feel alone because they'll see somebody out there.
It's amazing.
So, it's really great that I'm able to do that. And I hope to for a very long time.
Yes,
me
too. No one hopes that more than me.
So, thank you everybody for listening. This was a special episode with my mom, Joy. And this is Staying Connected. In case you didn't know what you were listening to, this is what it is. And this is a monthly podcast where I talk to somebody affected by Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, which I also have. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, share it with your friends, share it with your family. If maybe your friend is a medical student, they'll probably love it. So thank you everybody again, and we'll talk to you soon.